welcome to Creative Mornings Lexington. We are really excited to do something a little bit different today, to dive into what is this crazy thing we do, Creative Mornings, what's the state of creativity around the globe, talk to a friend across the pond about what creativity is like in London, and learn a little bit more about Creative Mornings. So for those who have never joined us, this is Creative Mornings. You are in the right place. We have been doing these virtual and hybrid events now for the last 16, 17 months, and we're really excited just to still have a way to boost creativity here in Lexington, to have a way to connect creatives, and also just to inspire. So that's what we try to do here at Creative Mornings Lexington. But if you don't know, Creative Mornings is a global chapter. It's not something that just happens in Lexington, Kentucky. We have over 200 chapters around the globe. They're all talking about creativity. They're all given a theme. This month's theme is release, and they interpret that theme however they want, whether that is a speaker, whether that is a fun game show. We're going to learn a little bit about what's happening in London. Sounds like they've done a couple fun things there. So with that, let me introduce another host. Al, are you with us?
I am. Hello.
Hello, welcome. Well, welcome to Creative Mornings Lexington. Where are you right now, and what time is it where you are?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Al. I'm the host of London Creative Mornings. So London in the UK. I am currently in my studio office. It is 2 p.m. in the afternoon, so we've just finished lunch, and so we've had our morning done already.
And so you were the host there in London, right? And how long have you been the host?
I have been the host for close to 3 years. So I've been part of the team for now 5 years, but I've been hosting it for close to 3 years. And Creative Mornings London has been going on for 8 years. And so we recently celebrated our 8th birthday, and we are actually also the 8th chapter to open.
Wow, the 8th, okay, so there's something about 8ths going on there. 8th chapter, 8th year. I think we are into our 5th year, but we were like the 150th chapter to get started. We were far down the path. So thank you for blazing the trail in London.
Not at all. I think we're all in this together.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a minute, we're going to play a fun wheel of games to get to know you, to get to know creativity. But anything else, what should people know about you?
Right, that's a very big question.
Yeah.
I am Alan. Although I am the host of the London chapter, I've actually only been in London for the past 5 years. I am half Czech and half Iraqi. So my mom is from the Czech Republic and my dad is from Iraq. But I'm also Canadian, which is why I sound like this.
Yeah.
So I became Canadian in 2016, and then I came to London. And so I have worked in very unorthodox career path, I would want to say. And even though I graduated in microbiology and immunology, and I love bacteria and viruses, which is not what you're allowed to say these days.
Yeah.
It's triggering, but I knew I didn't want to work in the science world. I wanted to do something a bit more creative, and so I've had a bit of dabbling in web development and the web coding world, but then also events and brand strategy and design. But now I work as a documentary film producer.
Well, absolutely. So that's what in your bio, kind of that zigzag of careers. Well, and then what made you do this crazy thing called Creative Mornings? It's all volunteer. That's what I tell people. So why do you do it?
I also want to find out why you do
it. Yeah.
So I think having moved around a lot, and traveled, I found that there was that consistent family of creativity and wacky individuals all around the world. And so I actually landed in London on a Tuesday, and that Friday was a Creative Mornings. And I thought, oh, hold on a minute. I know this. I know this idea. I know this gathering. I know this world. And so let me go and attend. And I attended, and I felt immediately at home, and I loved that. And so there's this kind of family sense of belonging wherever you might go, and you immediately meet others that are open to the same principles, which is everyone is welcome and everyone is creative. And I absolutely love those two tenets that we stick to. And so I got involved, and I after attending that first event, I went up to the host and I said, hey, I just moved to London and I would love to get involved. And she said, no, we're fine. We've got a full team. And so I just became an attendee and then slowly started showing up early. And then they said, oh, we actually need someone on the team. And so joined the team. And I think over the years, the thing that has stuck with me and the thing that makes me do this time and again is someone described it as we are all socially awkward in some or another, but Creative Mornings is the one place that accepts your social awkwardness, whatever that is. And I love being part of creating that space.
Well, and I'll say in Lexington, it started kind of similarly. I am not from Lexington. I moved here, I guess, 8 years ago. And I, in my day job, was working for government. So not, in a traditionally defined creative space, but I love creativity. I thought I was really creative, and I wanted to connect with these other wacky, crazy, nerdy, amazing creatives. So I got a couple people together, and we drove up to Louisville. So there's a Louisville chapter about an hour away, and went to their Creative Mornings and was just blown away with the energy, the coffee. We didn't know anybody, but you just left feeling this jolt of energy and excitement, and you're like, man, that really inspired me. And so we came back to Lexington and we sat at a table, and I remember sitting around the table and saying, we can do this. We can bring this to Lexington. We have makers and creatives, and we have artists, and we have designers, and we have a videographer. And that's how we pitched, that we needed to bring it to Lexington. So I was there from the very beginning. Didn't start out as the host. We had an amazing host that ran an art center here in Lexington that started out for the first 2 years. And then I've been the host for a year, and then I have a co-host, an amazing co-host now, Jason, who helps with a lot of it, and we've been the co-host for 2 years. So that's kind of how we started it, looking for people in all different kind of creative spaces. I think this may be the same in London. There were these great pockets of, here's where all the artists meet. Here's where all the chefs meet. Here's where all the tech people meet. And it didn't feel like we were talking to each other. So what a great way over breakfast to have a cup of coffee and have that mingling of creatives.
100%. And I think what I loved about it is actually a story from Raquel, who is the host of Creative Mornings Washington, D.C. And she was saying, because this is a labor of love and we do this without sort of a budget or a massive kind of payment around it, we need to look for spaces that would host us for free. And so they had put together Creative Mornings Washington, D.C. in the public library there. And it's where they host their events. And when you think about Creative Mornings, it needs to be inclusive and welcoming. And so everyone is welcome, so you don't pay to attend it. And so in their audience, you had these lobbyists and these government officials who were attending the Creative Mornings chapter, sitting next to folks who are homeless, because the public library is a place where a lot of homeless folks spend time, and that's where they were charging their phone and checking in on their Facebook. And in that one event, you had someone who's a government lobbyist sitting next to someone who's homeless. And I find that Creative Mornings is that space that really, truly brings people that may not have otherwise been in the same room.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love everyone is creative. So, and that's where sometimes I say, I'm not in a traditional creative space, but I really believe that I'm creative, and accountants are creative, and government people are creative. And I think this is just a great place to connect all those people.
100%.
So this is why we do it. This is why it's a labor of love. We volunteer. We're still doing it. Sometimes I wake up and say, why am I still doing this? But because you leave, and it's so awesome. And I'm really excited. At some point, when we can safely have people back together, we will be doing that. But let's get to this game. Are you ready?
I am ready. Let's do it.
All right, so we're going to pull up a wheel of questions, and we're going to spin the wheel here.
Uh-oh.
All right, let's see what the first question is. All right, so tell me about your favorite Creative Mornings event, and I'll be thinking about mine as well.
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to pick two, if that's okay. One that's kind of an in-person one that we had, and then one of the virtual ones that we did. And so we had an in-person event a few years back with, the speaker was Sir William Sieghart, who is the founder of National Poetry Day here in the UK. And he is an incredible speaker, but it's one of those events that sticks out to my mind because he had no presentation, no slides. He just came with his book of poetry and read a few poems, but talked to us about why he believes poetry could be a healing source of knowledge and also love. And through reading poems interspersed with his talk, you get to really get the wide variety of poetry, whether it's something humorous and silly and really funny, and then all the way to something that's deeply moving and incredibly powerful that gives you goosebumps. And so it was one of those things that broke the format in a way where you don't get to see someone just presenting off of a set of slides, but really get to see the kind of creativity that they're talking about in action, because he performed them in such a beautiful way. And then the virtual one I want to say is my favorite is we did a UK-wide event. We did an event with all of the other cities in the UK, and we got together and we had a musician from Scotland, and then a performer from Wales, and then another speaker from England. And so all of these cities coming together and building something that we couldn't have done otherwise. And so it was just a beautiful gathering. We say, oh, you're in a different city, but hey, you're a phenomenal illustrator. And now that everyone's working remotely, we can still work together. What about yours?
So it's similar. We partnered, I'll do one virtual and one in person. We partnered with Nashville. I was telling you about this earlier. I think it was January and February. And the planning of it was just so fun because I was connecting with another host and we were trying our best to make something interactive and virtual. And we were both really trying to do something that was great for our communities. And we came up with this card game. So a lot of you guys who've been around for Creative Mornings for a while know we had this little card game. And we collaborated on Creative Mornings themes and pulled out different themes and put everyone in breakout rooms and said, you're gonna have a couple people from Nashville, a couple people from Lexington, and the whole point is for you to talk to someone not from your city. Because a lot of what we do when we're in person is connect people in our city. But why not, while we're virtual, play up this, what can we not do? What can we actually do better virtually than we can do in person? Instead of trying to really focus on recreating our in-person events. What can we do better? So that was, I think, super fun. People still have their card games. Will tell me about their card games. And it was just, it brought back that I'm really excited. It was something different. And then in person, gosh, it's so hard because we've had so many events. One of our first year events was with an author called Hannah Petard. She wrote a book. And we were in this beautiful, she's an author at our local university, University of Kentucky. She's an English professor. And we were also in the university art studio. And just everything about it felt connected to our community, felt connected to our university. And she told she's an author, so she can tell a really great story, but the whole talk, the 18, 20-minute talk was one story about her childhood and about someone that she had babysat. And she told it so eloquently and beautifully and then tied it to where she is right now in life. And I just thought, Mal, this is how you can really do storytelling, is really vividly and graphically explaining just one story. So that was one of my favorites. And it's also amazing to see a female writer.
I love that. I'm going to go watch that event after.
Yeah, that's what's so awesome about Creative Mornings too, is that you can watch talks from London and San Francisco and Bangkok and all over the world. All right, let's spin again. All right, so tell me the best story about yourself that will give the audience a picture of who you are.
Gosh, that is intimidating.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, I've got this. I often get asked about the pendant that I wear around my neck. And a lot of people say, oh, what is it and what does it say on it? And what's the story behind it? And I'm a bit hesitant to share what it is, but there is a story behind it. It says, keep calm and carry on, which is a bit, cliche, if you will, but it was actually a gift from my mom. And it's because at university, I began to get really anxious and get really bogged down with grades and academics and trying to control everything and be in charge of what's happening next and my grades and all of those things. And so after graduation, I thought, okay, I need to get out of this loop of anxiety and kind of being nervous about everything. And so I decided to do something absolutely out of my comfort zone and maybe out of everyone else's comfort zone, which is to buy a one-way ticket to Japan with nothing planned. And I went there without knowing anyone, knowing the language, or knowing anything what I would do after getting out of the airport. And it worked out in the end, in the sense that I ended up living there for a year, and I found work and an apartment, and I made a community there. But I think the story of that encapsulates me in the sense that before leaving, my parents gave me 3 pieces of advice, which is the 3 pieces of advice that I would give to anybody. And as they were sending their son on the flight to go to Japan, which is a one-way trip with no one on the other side waiting for him, they said, the first, don't forget your background and where you came from. That's really important. The second one is don't fall in love with the first person who helps you, which is also important. And then the third, and perhaps the most important, is to stay hydrated.
That's a really good story. It is hard for me to think about a story, I think right now, and I tell people things are about seasons of life. And so the season of life I'm in right now is I have a 3-year-old. And so I have lots of funny stories that just depict where I am right now in life, just balancing having a 3-year-old. So this week, we took my son to the baseball park. And so my son has a lot of sensory, loves touching and feeling, and we've taken him to the baseball park. I've decided that I'm going to bring our dog, and it's just myself. I was telling you, 7 months pregnant, so it's like, oh, I'm going to try to do all these things. And my son immediately lays down in the baseball field and rolls himself in all the baseball dirt, and the dog starts running away, and here I am trying to chase both of them. So it's just, I think that kind of tells you where I am in life right now, just trying to balance everything and going forward. So let's do one more question, and then I want to know a little bit about what it's like in London. So let's spin again.
Sure.
Do. We need, music. So well, here we go. What's the biggest misconception about your city, so about London, or about your Creative Mornings chapter?
In terms of, I'll start with London. I think the most prevalent misconception is that you get here and you will be surrounded and met with a lot of English and British people. And actually, that's not the case. It's a very, very mostly international city. And so that then translates over into our Creative Mornings chapter. We've got a team of 11 people on the Creative Mornings team, and 3 of them are British. The others, the 8, are from abroad. And so we've got a very international team, and that translates to the chapter. And in terms of the misconception about Creative Mornings London is people think, oh, you're the 8th chapter, you're in this big city, and you're in this international metropolis, so your events must be big. But they're not. We kind of try to keep them intimate and small so that you don't get this overwhelming feeling of entering a room with 500 people. We never do that. Maximum it would be 120 people or so. And so it still feels cozy and intimate and approachable. But what about Lexington? What are the misconceptions around that?
Well, and I think always the early misconceptions, especially if you're not from Lexington or Kentucky, is like, oh, you're from Lexington. I know it for horses and I know it for basketball. And so there are a lot of things outside of those 2 amazing industries here in Lexington that have to do with the arts and creativity and diversity in our city. And so there's another layer. And I think that's also a reason why when we started Creative Mornings, it can feel probably like any big city, probably like when you moved into London, it can feel hard to break into what else is going on. That's not the first two big industries, the amazing industries that you see. So I think that's the misconception. That's all there is here is our great basketball team and the horse racing. And then about Creative Mornings, I don't know if there's any I'm sure there are misconceptions. Probably one that it's only for creatives. You have to be a videographer to attend, or you have to be an artist to attend. And, oh, I am an accountant, or an architect, or maybe that's a misconception is people, how do I get plugged in? And I tell them, just show up. That's the beauty of these things. They're free. We do them once a month. They're early in the morning. If you'll get up, I'll provide you coffee, I'll provide you breakfast, and I'll provide you a great speaker. So I think that's just trying to explain what this thing is that we do.
Hopefully that will be really an attractive offer, and hopefully an open door for someone who says, oh, I'm not creative. And you think, no, everyone is.
Well, and we also get, just like you, a lot of people who have just moved to the city. I had just moved to Lexington. We get a lot of people that have moved either back, they're a boomerang, they lived here, they went and worked off in a city for a while, and they're coming back into Lexington trying to find a second career. So we also get a lot of people that are not originally from Lexington. All right, well, before we go back to the wheel of names, we have been in COVID times for a year and a half, and I think we always picture of here's what it's like in Lexington. But it's also interesting to think of this as something happening to everyone around the world. What has been your thought, or what has it been like in London, and what has that meant for your chapter in Creative Mornings?
I think it was daunting at the beginning when everything went digital and virtual over Zoom, and a lot of what we rely on in our world is that magic of being in the same room and the electricity of meeting someone new and sitting next to a stranger and finding out that you share something. And so we were intimidated by going online, but that felt alleviated by the fact that, as you mentioned, everyone is going through this. And so it really brought a connection between our community and other communities around the world, not just in the UK. And so the team got connected with Creative Mornings chapters in Brazil and in the US and in Romania. And that way we were able to really support each other. But also our team themselves, they had to go home. So our team went back to their families in India and in Romania and France and Wales. And so we kind of, as a team, spread out, but we were still able to put on these events because things were virtual. But it has been difficult, and I think a turning point was towards the autumn of last year. We had hosted an event where we actually invited a lot of, we did a panel kind of format with previous speakers that we've had. And we picked the biggest names that we had, the most impactful speakers, someone talking about their world in audio production and podcasting, a linguistics professor who works with languages that are dying and going extinct, all the way to someone who works in diversity in the tech industry. And we brought them back just to vent. And we said, this is an open discussion to say, how has coronavirus ruined your plans, your creativity, and how has it inspired you in other ways? And that was a really empowering session to hear from all of these people that you've heard from before that say, oh, I've accomplished this and that, and I've done the X, Y, Z, but now are being honest and open and vulnerable to say, now my plans are up in the air, now my hopes are now different, and now I'm restricted to these things. And so it became much more relatable. And I think my favorite thing about this pandemic, if you can say that, is it broke down the barrier between the stage and the audience. I think that's something that we've fallen into in a lot of events and Creative Mornings, where there's a barrier between the speaker who's talking at you and then the audience. And in a Zoom format, you put them in a breakout room, and the speaker is talking with attendees and from all around the world. And so it really just levels that hierarchy down and it makes it a lot more approachable.
Yeah, I love this idea of a venting session, just even bringing back those past speakers. So that's probably interesting because you've already have a reference point of who they are and what they do, but here's where they are right now. And I think That's what we've also seen. Some of our talks over the last year, especially we've really focused on a lot of Black Lives Matter and the racial issues here in Kentucky, and had some really powerful speakers, is being very vulnerable and candid and having those conversations. So I think that's been really interesting, just to see the shift. And even our speakers sometimes saying, can I talk about this? Can I say this? What do you want? And it's, you know, at Creative Mornings, we really say, this is your stage. We've given you the stage for 20 minutes. Here's a very loose theme. Interpret it however you want. But there's not those kind of boundaries around what you can and cannot talk about. So I also have appreciated those speakers speaking to what this last year has meant to them.
And I think in a way it's less intimidating of a stage as well. If you're just sitting behind your laptop and you can just say whatever you want to say, and you're not standing in a room in front of an audience that's looking at you eagerly. And so I think in a way it probably is easier for a speaker.
Yeah, that's probably true. When you're like, how's everyone going to interpret this? That's what I remember our very first one, you know, we were just getting used to this teleprompter thing, and she did amazing, but it is hard of where do I look, how would that have been different if we were in person? So definitely been interesting. All right, let's go back to our wheel.
Yes, let's do it.
Let's see what's up next. So, and this is, we kind of just did this one. Tell me about your community over the last year. What's the best experience or interaction you've had?
I think our community, in line with a lot of people and places around the world, has felt lonely over the past year. And I think when we were all isolating and staying at home and working from home, I think there was a real pandemic of loneliness. And that's something that we've all experienced, and whether it's people moving back home with their families, or you know, being stuck in their flat and not being able to kind of go out, that it kind of informed the best interaction that I've had, which is I've had a few people from our community come up to us and say, thank you so much for doing these virtual events, because it still gives me that sense of connection to London and to the people that I used to see and the things I used to do, despite not being in the same city anymore. And so I've moved back with my parents, and now I'm living in the countryside and I can't be in London, but I still feel a connection to the city through those events. But at the same time, our events have become more international in a way. We've had people log in into Zoom from India and Australia and Dubai and South Africa, and you think, you're awake at this time to join our event. We feel so honored to have you here, but that's not something that we could have done in person. And so it's really kind of opened up our eyes and kept us connected, and I think much more vulnerable, because I think loneliness was definitely something that was there before, and especially in a big city, it can definitely get you down, but people don't talk about it and don't openly share it. But when we're all going under this duress, then you can say, oh man, I've had a really rough week or a really rough day. Yeah, what about Lexington?
Well, I think I wanted to pick up on one thing you said that was really interesting there. And if people aren't tapping into the Creative Mornings Global, you know that you can. You don't have to just attend Creative Mornings Lexington. There's all these lists of events happening that you can watch, as well as field trips. So I've attended many Creative Mornings field trips that are really interactive. So if you are wanting that sense of, I want to go in a breakout room and I want to meet someone from Chicago, I want to meet someone from San Francisco or New Zealand or Guadalajara, definitely tap into the field trip component, because I do think that's those early calls that where the Creative Mornings headquarters got all of us together, and you had people, I think you were on one of them, you kind of spoke about either yours or maybe the second one, I forget where we saw you, but that's been the really interesting thing to hear, oh, this is what it's like in New Zealand. You're 2-3 months ahead of us in terms of where we were in all the rates, or talking to some people in Asia from our Singapore chapter. And it was really interesting to connect globally. So I'm just, while you were talking about it, I'm going to give that pitch to watch a field trip or to watch another chapter, because that is something you can do better right now virtually than you can do in person.
Amen.
So, and this went so fast, we're getting close on time, but I did get a question from our Facebook Live.
Go on.
So family and being welcome sounds like anchors for you. What anchors you into new creative projects, or what grounds you in the variety of projects?
What anchors me in a new project?
Yep. Or what grounds you in the variety of projects that you are doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the thing that anchors me is the idea of bringing in the right people to do a project together, and not necessarily to shape it from start to finish, but I like bringing in the right team, and whether that's a film or a website or something. And so I like the mix of personalities and how they can gel together or not. And if they don't, then finding a way that the puzzle pieces can work together. So that's definitely something that anchors me, because it's it's how you find the passion within each person, and that gives the fuel to power the project. And that's something that definitely grounds me. And in terms of what the variety of projects, yeah, I think that's the thing that I look for is a lot of honesty. And so there's a very distinct difference between transparency and honesty. And transparency is just kind of trying to get an outcome out of something, but honesty is just telling it how it is, and whether that's a brand or that's a story, that's kind of the thing that I look for in the variety of speakers that we bring in, but also the projects that I do in my day job.
And then I have two more that came in from our Instagram. You're in a bigger city, but how did you plug in a bigger city?
Very good question. It is intimidating in the sense that there's just a lot going on in different pockets, but I think identifying the passions and things that interest you, the question that you get asked is, what could you talk for hours on about? And if that's cycling or hiking or podcasts, then finding the relevant events, because those ones were always, in a big city, there's always something happening at all hours of the day. You want to go to a concert now? It's happening. You want to go to a networking event? It's happening. You want to go to a festival? It's happening. And so you can get intimidated by the sheer amount of things going on, but kind of identifying which ones you are passionate about, not work-wise, your hobbies, your things that keep you up at night, the things that at the pub you say, you heard? And so that kind of thing, I think, will naturally bring you to the people that are your tribe, your family.
And it sounds like it took you a little bit while to plug in. It sounds like you're going to Creative Mornings, you're doing the other things. So I think that's also advice I give people when they move here is persistence and patience. Sometimes it won't happen in the first year, but keep going back, keep connecting, and it'll start to get smaller, and you'll start to feel your pot of people or your tribe. And so those are also my advice. The other question we got, which we actually took from your all's Instagram, of let's see how it was phrased. What do you hope to reimagine moving forward?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I hope that we can reimagine the way that we work. I think there's a lot of hesitation around remote working and working from home, and which jobs can be done remotely. And now I think that's kind of put things over their head and turned it upside down. And I'm hoping that we can continue to question that because it makes it more accessible. Just because someone needs to stay at home with their kids or has accessibility issues and cannot go to that particular studio or office doesn't mean that they can't do the job. And so I'm hoping that reimagination of how we work and how we are creatively together continues, because I don't want us to go back to normal, because I don't think there was a normal, and I don't think it should be back to the way that it was.
Yeah, I would probably echo everything you say there. I'm a remote worker. I've switched into a remote job. It sounds like some of the work that you're doing is remote. It'll be interesting to see how that plays into culture and morale and connectiveness. Like, this was a great connected conversation. I feel really connected to you. So how can we continue those great connected conversations if we can't meet face to face? And we want more global partners, which I think means more opportunities for different creatives.
Yeah, and also knowing that through that connection, we can not only help each other, but that the issues that you're facing in your city are impacting in ways that we may not know, things are happening here and vice versa. And so whether we are tackling something like inclusivity in the tech industry, that's not something that's only a problem here in the UK, it's also all around the world. Or the Black Lives Matter movement, it's global and it's not just city specific. And so kind of keeping those connections going, because it's not, you might think, oh, we've only got this thing relevant here, but it's almost certainly isn't. Yeah.
Well, I've already gone over time. What did I not get to ask you that you wanted to talk about, that you wanted to share?
Ooh, I think we covered a lot of ground. The one thing is, I think one thing that we've done in London that I would hope would inspire some others in other chapters is we have constantly tried to shift the venue of where we host our events. And partly because we're a massive city, but also where you bring people together informs how your audience makeup will be. And so if you're more east, then more people who live east will join. More west, more people who live there will be able to attend. And so moving it as much as possible kind of opens it to more people, and trying to think about where is a creative space that people don't necessarily go to often enough, and whether that's hosting people together in a park or in a disused metro station or in a library or something, kind of looking at the location where you're bringing people together. I'm hoping that that's something that we get to question and play with more. We don't necessarily need to be in a lecture hall with a presentation slide.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting is we also have a couple new volunteers that have joined us, and I've learned, they've only learned about Creative Mornings virtually. So for the last year, they've never been to an in-person event, and I was telling a couple of them we move venues every time for that reason, to get into new creative spaces that aren't typical venues, to just meet new people. But I think that's also been a really interesting trend that I've seen people that have plugged in, that have learned about Creative Mornings for the first time in the last year. And so it'll be interesting as we go back to some kind of reimagined in-person hybrid virtual event that will have all these new people that only know us as a virtual streaming session. So how does that play into when we meet in person, which will be interesting. All right, last thought, last sentence. It's been so fun having you. It kind of reinvigorates me as a host, gets me really excited about going forward. I can relate to a lot of the themes and purpose and intention and vision that you have for your chapter, as well as I can sense this amazing team connection and building that team. So thank you. Before you give the last comment, just want to say thank you for coming on and doing this.
No, of course, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I think one thing is that kind of global sense of acceptable awkwardness wherever you go. And I like that. So you can be socially awkward anywhere around the world through Creative Mornings. And it's a pleasure being connected with so many chapters and with Lexington as well, because getting an insight into your city and your community. And I think I will leave you with a fun fact, which I learned recently. You can use it in pub quizzes or anything that you want to impress someone with, which is the rings around Saturn, the planet Saturn, are 170,000 miles wide. So if you look at the rings around Saturn, they're that wide. But in terms of how thick they are 30 feet. So just 10 meters. So, 2 stories. Not very thick. So they're super wide, but very, very thin. So yeah, maybe you can have fun with that.
That's our nice fun fact for a day. It sounds like you're bringing back some of that science. So I want to thank everyone that has watched us on the Facebook Live today. It has been really fun to talk to our Creative Mornings host, partner, peer over in London. We've also kind of connected globally to know that, you know, what we're doing here, I say it every month, but it's happening all over the globe. And so it's fun to finally get to show people what else is happening in different chapters. And I hope that's something we continue to do. We did a little bit where we partnered with Nashville, a little bit more where we tap into that. And if you haven't done watch another global chapter, do another global Creative Mornings. And then we're really excited. We don't really know what it'll look like, but in the next couple months, we will have some form of in-person hybrid event. And so if you aren't, keep a lookout on our newsletter for what that'll look like in the future. And with that, I like to end with everyone is welcome and everyone is creative. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.